Hey, you're about to listen to my interview with Keith Harmon. He has more than 30 years experience in the restaurant and hospitality space. He knows everything about the economics and finances behind small bars, small restaurants, and talks a little bit about how these types of businesses are navigating the coronavirus pandemic. Enjoy the interview.
You're listening to Going Deep with Aaron Watson. You're going deep.
So Keith, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, man. I'm super excited to be your first podcast experience.
Yeah, this is amazing. Really appreciate you having me. And I think podcasting in general is a great format, and we live in with an embarrassment of riches as far as information. So let's do it. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
And you have a lot of experience to tap into and kind of wisdom that's hard earned from experience to share with the audience. You have 30 years in hospitality. Your current company, Alchemy Financial, helps other firms in the hospitality industry, so think bars and restaurants, make better decisions from a financial perspective, kind of in the veins of bookkeeping, financial planning, and what I read as kind of like a fractional CFO type of role. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on kind of your vantage point into the industry and some of those services that you provide?
Yeah, so Alchemy Financial started off as We Live to Serve consulting, and I got a chance in 2008 to learn the accounting back of house administrative side of the financial reality of restaurants. And I was simultaneously excited to see those things and horrified to see how bad the business model is. And I think there's a problem in the industry where chefs and GMs, a lot of times the financial reality of an operational bar or restaurant isn't shared with them, and so they're excited to open their own place, and then they have to kind of find out one by one how difficult it is financially to make it work. And that was true when I first got involved about 12 years ago on the accounting side. And it's been more and more true with time. And now here comes coronavirus, and it just shows, the tide goes out. We see everyone that's naked. And I saw it somewhere that the industry itself has been sort of in stage 3 or stage 4 cancer. And now here comes an event like this, and it's just accelerating a lot of good and bad things in the industry. But certainly it's an existential threat to how places are able to stay open and keep those livelihoods going.
So as I, talk to different investors or entrepreneurs or just kind of business thinkers, it is a common trope that one of the most brutal games to get into is the restaurant or bar business. And I, as an outsider, attribute that to a couple of things. Number one, it's highly legible. Everyone has been to a bar or restaurant at some point in time. It's very easy to conceive, okay, who all the roles are. So there's a legibility to it. And then there's also just a passion to share whatever cuisine is that may be familiar to you. And I guess I kind of understand the challenges in terms of margins for food service and why that would be, infinitely harder than like a software zero marginal cost type of model for a business. But can maybe just like at a 101 type of level, when you talk about these folks that don't really have a grounding in those financial realities when they get into this type of business, can you just walk us through some maybe those like basic mistakes that are made or just blind spots that people might have?
Yeah, well, I think I would make the sort of 50,000 foot view observation that, the financial management side of it is really, there are just too many rules of thumbs. So you have these things kicking around the ecosystem, like cost of goods should be 30%, payroll should be 30%, rent shouldn't be more than 8 or 10% of revenue. Now, those rules tend to be largely true, but they're modified substantially. So if you're in an area where you have to pay really high rent just to get exposure to foot traffic, then by definition, the extra money you spend in rent needs to come out of either cost of goods or payroll. And then there are different, capitalization models where, depending on whether you were able to buy a restaurant intact for maybe $200,000, or you had to build it from scratch, which can be anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million. I think there's a tendency to move in and adopt other people's price points and all these rules of thumb that have sort of been handed down. And the basic logic is that if 30% is cost of goods and 30% is payroll and 30% is quote unquote everything else, then you're left with 10% margins. That rarely ends up being the case. And in particular, the places that you would want to support and see successful that have missions to, feature farm to table food, offer superior benefits and rates of pay and employment security, that want to offer, and they want to do all this at a reasonable price point to the consumer. That's usually judged in comparison with a lot of times chain restaurants and what the price of a burger should be or the price of a steak should be. You start putting together loose rules of thumb with a desire to do better in certain areas. And the next thing you know, you're breaking even or maybe making 3 or 4 percentage points on your sales. And those sorts of numbers just don't lend themselves to wealthy owners, to investors to get their money back in a reasonable amount of time. And then, there's really not much fat left over on the bone at all. So if you're closed for 3 weeks because of snowstorms or 2 months, again, coronavirus is terrible. You don't have a lot of capital set aside to get through difficulties in the economics. It's a really hard business. And you're right. There's so many different moving pieces.
Yeah. And it just seems like, one of the things we say so often on the show is there's like, you get into an industry for a specific reason. You're a baker, you're a chef, you're a candlestick maker, whatever. And that's like the thing that you do so well. But then there's this kind of other skill set of business running and entrepreneurship that kind of has to be blended. And eventually, if you're successful, often like becomes your job more so than the kind of core insight that you had at the beginning perfectly summarizes that. But, in this context of a global pandemic, and then fascinating to me, I would have not guessed or not necessarily understood this kind of like stage 3 or 4 type of cancer for this industry in particular. Can you give us a little kind of clear picture in what you're seeing on the ground as an advisor, as a consigliere to this space? What was already bubbling up before the pandemic, and kind of how folks have had to navigate these uncharted waters?
Yeah, so I would say that as a general observation, what especially independent restaurants aren't that great at, but chain restaurants and large producers are really good at, is forecasting inflation. So there's been sort of slow food cost creep that's been happening for 4 to 7 years. And what practically happens is that the price of almost everything on your menu slowly goes up over time, but especially at the independent operator level, a lot of times they're reviewing their books on 3, 6, 9-month delays, and so they set their prices given a certain per ingredient cost of goods. And then they operate their business for 6 months or 9 months. And then underneath that, you've got inflation for cost of goods in terms of like what the food and liquor and beer and everything costs. So you've got inflation going on underneath your pricing structure. And then you've got, on an ongoing level, it's been a really difficult labor market, whether that's minimum wage increases or just highly competitive market to get great cooks and managers and things like that. And so you tend to set your prices on a backwards looking basis where you're looking at last year's numbers and making price adjustments and pretty afraid of scaring off business or scaring off customers. So you set the prices based on everything backwards looking, but then on a rolling basis, inflation creeps in. And so, you look at last year and you realize you only made 2%. So you up your prices by say 5%. And you hope that's good enough. But by the time you look again, inflation has crept in underneath, and then you're back to 2% and rinse and repeat. And I think another thing that happens is that, it's in the industry and almost every other profession, as you get started in the industry and move up, you get what I would call a view of the management economics where you're held to these sort of financial standards. So it happens to bookkeepers, like you go to work for a bookkeeping firm and you work your way up and you see the underlying mechanics that make a place successful. And then after you put in your time, 5, 8, 10, 12 years in the industry, you've seen enough where you have a good idea of whether you should go off and do it on your own. And that's true of many other professions. But restaurants, I think, I read somewhere, and I think it was a good observation, that sort of restaurants in the last 10 or 12 years have been like rock and roll was in the 60s, where there's a lot of non-financial reasons to get into it, and it's a popular culture. And so you get a lot of people moving into it that don't necessarily, first of all, they don't have that background of seeing how an actual restaurant performs, but even the people that organically grow in it, I almost think the owners do managers and cooks and employees a disservice because they don't share how bad the financial results are, which would give them, those people coming up through the system, to think about novel ways to do better, whether it was managing demand differently, looking at pricing differently, which I think has, a lot of positive effects going forward. And so by the time people actually are responsible for this place, they're overwhelmed by the reality of operating a small restaurant, and then they just didn't have a good set of financial tools going into it by which they could keep an eye on their performance. And again, just on a backwards looking basis, they're always getting bad news, doing their best, and then they put their head under the hood again, and the next time they look up, things haven't gotten much better. So I really think that this crisis accelerates a lot of trends that need to be addressed, and one of which is pricing, one of which would be demand management, which are ways that you get people into the restaurant on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday versus just Friday and Saturday. And I think dynamic pricing models going forward, and we because we're exhausted, we've allowed a lot of middlemen to explore and exploit options that we haven't been doing on our own, like delivery, like having a better website, like not having to pay an inordinate price per diner to get reservations in the door. And now this is forcing a reckoning where restaurants have to get better at delivery and not allow that big slice to go out the door to middlemen like Grubhub and Eater and Caviar, Seamless, and not that those businesses didn't find a consumer surplus that they deserve to have some benefit of, but the restaurants just don't have the surplus in their margins to let that happen. And so I guess while I have you, I'd like to give a big shout out to Nick Kokonis, that's the owner of the Alinea Group, and also Talk. And Talk in particular addresses a lot of issues with the demand management and pricing side of things. And he's quickly rolled out a software tool for restaurants to do takeout and pickup and kind of fashion their offerings in such a way that it gives restaurants a chance to get through this difficult time. So I think he deserves a ton of credit for proactively thinking through and designing the tools so that restaurants can kind of take back some of their survival metrics back into their own hands.
So that's such an interesting point. I'm glad we kind of got here organically. Is one of the things that I saw in my own behavior over the last 2 years was an acceleration of food delivery app usage. The days, I come home, I'm dead tired, fiance's tired, don't really want to cook, don't really want to go anywhere. Hey, this thing could be to us. That's insanely lovely, and particularly when it's partially subsidized by a venture capitalist somewhere. That's a win for me as a consumer. But one of the things that we've just from reading the news, trying to get a little bit smarter, the thing that I keep coming back to is I know that the restaurants can be a brutal business. Those food delivery are also incredibly shockingly difficult businesses because of, number one, the competition in the space between those other apps. Even some of the chicanery that's pulled in the way that they'll change the price of a product to hide their fee, or the way that it, like all the chicanery that's going on to try and minimize the perceived price of that delivery, despite the fact that it is being inflated. And then I believe there was maybe we can start with the letter from I believe it was Grubhub, indicating that it was their sales through those small independent businesses that were the primary driver of their profitability, makes for a very kind of convoluted decision for a restaurateur to make, but also a kind of market dynamic that most consumers just aren't aware of.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the case. And I think, first of all, I'm a huge, I'm a huge advocate for restaurants, independent restaurants, especially. At the same time, I'm a bigger advocate for free markets and consumer choice. And I think that stuff's really important. And there's just, in my mind, there's no question that, you look at what OpenTable did a long time ago and now what these delivery apps are doing. They absolutely identified an area that the consumer was underserved and they came in to take advantage of it. And that's really, I don't think you can hold that against them. And I personally don't have a grudge against any of those companies, with the caveat that it's not my job to make those companies more profitable. It's my job to support my clients, no matter what that means. And certainly, they identified it, but at the same time, it's our underlying product that drives the market for it. And so, I think, again, this is a chance where, and then I would make the observation, I know these economics, that, everything's about building a network now and getting to scale. And you do have some seriously well-funded digital domain actors that are able to operate at a loss for a long time to sort of compete and offer better prices to the consumer. And they've made those economics work. But I do think that long term, I'm hoping that restaurants across the country are able to sort of take some of those economics back. And it'll be a fight, but at the same time, we're the ones that we control the value proposition, we control our own business models, and the opportunity was only there for them because we left it on the table, and we're certainly not going to leave it on the table anymore. And again, not to sort of drive back to this too much, and I have no business relationship with them, but I'm a big fan of innovation and what Nick's done at Talk to quickly roll out tools so that restaurants can offer this service without needing to give a cut to a third-party operator. I think it's a crucial adjustment to be made in this environment. And then I don't think that adjustment is going away at all. Because, as you said, good news, bad news. People have much better taste and much higher expectations, and my wife and I do it as well. Like we love the idea of not cooking and have someone bring the food and not having to do the dishes afterwards. That's great. At the same time, up until even 5 years ago, if you wanted delivery, you were gonna get pizza or Chinese, maybe Indian. And everyone's tastes have gotten better. So good news, bad news. They want to order from these smaller restaurants that put more energy and craft and care into their product. So that's the good news side. But then the bad news side is that the restaurants weren't really ready for that. And I think for a long time, because it's not, hospitality really is, you have to have a deep commitment to making other people happy to work in this business. And I think hospitality in general is an underappreciated phenomena. And, that idea of making someone happy, we've certainly focused on the face-to-face, the face-to-face interaction and the experience you can give. But there are ways to deliver that experience at home as well. And I'm excited to see the industry moving forward. I'm excited to see independent restaurants take back that part of the consumer surplus because they are the ones that generate it. And again, good luck to everyone. But, I'm certainly on the restaurant side, and I think we're going to do a good job taking those dynamics back.
Yeah. And it seems like, the big part here is the cat's out of the bag in terms of the amount of people that have learned of or more normalized their habits for food delivery in the wake of this. It's just, it's out, it's here, and it's never going back. And so I think that the other kind of psychological shift that needs to be explored is, from some of my reading, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, a lot of restaurants saw the delivery, if they didn't already have it in place, as like an add-on, as a nice little extra, where they were still kind of viewing their business through the core. We have this many tables, this many seats. How many can we get out on a regular basis with a higher, price per table type of framework? And oh yeah, we get to use a little bit more of the capacity that we've built into our kitchen by delivering X amount of delivery meals per day, and we didn't even necessarily have a place for the delivery person to stand, and all these other kind of like dynamics that need to be built in. How do you, as people come out of this and they see that as a kind of more central part of their process, what adjustments do they need to make, like even down to like their financial modeling, to account for this part of their business?
Well, I mean, I think the adjustments they have to make there are the same adjustments that they needed to make in other areas. And now this has accelerated that, where it really is, it's all about demand management and what I would call solving the inelastic labor problem. And the inelastic labor problem is discussed among sort of restaurant finance and CFO types, but it goes something like this, where you get into Friday and Saturday night, and you've got prep cooks that come in and a line crew that comes in. But on Friday or Saturday night, like there's a lot of prep to do. And then you have your first seating 5:30 or 6 o'clock, and you're timing that so that you can have a fully compressed seating in the, say, 7 to 8:30 window. But you're also managing it so you can get at least another half to 3/4 of a turn, i.e. a turn being seating every seat in the restaurant one time. So on a Friday and Saturday night, you can get 2.5, 3 turns out of your restaurant if it's done right, but that's only 2 nights of the week. And then on Tuesday, you're maybe doing a full turn, a turn and a half overall, but you've almost got the same staff there. And it's not a problem on the server side because for the most part, they're below minimum wage in terms of their expense to the restaurant, but they actually do really well once you take into account tipping. And I could actually talk to you quite a bit about that model. But on the inelastic back of house labor side, on the hourly and salary side, you need the same manager that can get you through Friday night is needed there on a Tuesday, but the sales aren't there to match up with the expense. And then for the most part, I mean, you almost need the same amount of people to get through a single flat seating between 6:30 and 7:30 and make that single turn happy as you do to be ready to do 3 turns on a Friday night. And so how do you turn down your staffing to match Tuesday night sales? That's almost impossible. And unfortunately, there aren't any half, 3/4, or 2/3 line cooks and dishwashers available on the market. So it becomes more about trying to massage the demand side of things, which is how do we get more people to come in to decide, oh, well, instead of coming on Friday night when it's packed and waiting for our table, let's come on Tuesday or Wednesday or Sunday and make that special experience fit in better with the restaurant's economics. And I bring it up here because that demand management, now that gets extended to takeout and delivery. And one of the problems, and I think one of the pushbacks on a lot of takeout and delivery, is because it tended to overlay the same time people are getting home from work and exhausted and ordering out is the same time that the restaurant is gearing up on a Friday or Saturday night. And so having that extra capacity to put out, 50 different plates that are meant for diners that are 2 or 3 miles away instead of 2 or 3 tables away, you can't handle that demand out of the same facility. And if you build the facility that can do all that, it sits idle for the most part or underutilized on those off nights. And so finding tools to either get more notice about demand or to move demand into non-peak periods. That's really what it's all about. And again, that's a lot of what we do with tasting menus or pre-fee menus that have a different price on a Tuesday night versus a Friday night. One of the things that can really help a restaurant in terms of managing those sales is to get more notice and sort of get out of the Chinese restaurant or pizza place idea that, they can take however many calls they can at 5:30 on a Friday night. And okay, here we go. It's 100 pizzas or it's 50 pizzas. In the case of a small restaurant, especially, or an independent restaurant, especially the way the facilities are designed, you can handle that stuff. You just need more notice. And so, again, being able to sort of stuff those channels and then understanding what you can do to get more notice or move that demand to a different day of the week or a different time. Those are the types of tools that we got to get better at. And yeah, I think the changes that are coming because of this or on the other side of this, they were going to happen anyway. And at some point we needed to get out of all the rules of thumbs and we don't do this because, and we don't do that because. And usually it's interesting, even when you push owners on like, what's really the because of that? There's not a because there. And it's a good mental habit that if you ever, I try and do this with my kids, but if they're asking me questions, if I ever have to say, oh, because that's just how it is, that is a clear indicator that I really just don't understand what I'm talking about. And I try and look at those opportunities and say, okay, well, every time that you have an assumption about something you're working on and you end up saying to yourself or someone else, well, I can answer all these other questions, but this is just the way it is. That just the way it is, that assumption you're making is almost always a hole in your understanding or an assumption that's so old that no one thinks about it anymore and can be seriously challenged. And, I've seen firsthand and helped places do this and seen other restaurants do it that, people are actually willing to pay, more for a Friday night 7:00 reservation than they are for a Tuesday 6:00 reservation or a Friday 5:30 reservation. There's a lot more price flexibility in there than most restaurants give their customers credit for. And I'd make the same argument that, a lot of, cost of goods is thought of as a percentage, and that's how we're all brought up. Like, what's your cost of good percentage? Except the reality is that if you priced your grass-fed filet mignon at the same margin as you priced your soda, you would have like a $2 Coca-Cola and a $78 steak. And so it's funny that restaurants they're willing to live it up with it on the high side, that they know if they're bringing in great product, if it's great like free range local chicken, they still can't charge $40 for chicken parm. So they cap themselves on one side, and then on the other side, they sort of don't take advantage of the surplus that is there. And I think chicken parm is actually a great example. I had a restaurant, and we struggled. We had like 28 seats, and we were positive, but we needed to be always busy to be cash flow positive. And we put, there was we were trying to do a more refined version of Italian, but go figure, everyone wants chicken parm. It's an Italian restaurant; they want it. And so, we priced out the chicken parm. We put a lot of work into it, and the organic price to match our target food cost of goods was like $22. So we put it on the menu for $22. Immediately, it's the best seller, like by a margin. And that was a big lesson, I think, to all of us, to everyone involved. And in parallel with that, this is probably 6 or 7 years ago now, I was starting to really get into sort of supply side pricing, and there's a couple of thought leaders in this space. I'd look at the work of Ron Baker and Ed Kless, who do a good job here. But essentially, $22 is a terrible price point because people come in and they have their own dynamics. And so at $22, they are, for the most part, it's two groups of people or maybe three groups of people. But the first group of people is chicken parm. They love it. They're getting it, period. They don't really care about the money. It doesn't matter, The second group are people that were planning to get something, just under $20, 16, 17, 18. They saw the chicken parm, and now they stretched their expectations to spend more than 20. And now that chicken parm it's in a tough position to do so, but it's almost going to be the best chicken parm they've ever had to justify it. And so that fractional price point, barely above $20, actually makes half of that customer segment unhappy because they've been stretched and now it doesn't deliver on their new stretched expectation. And the other half just doesn't care, And so we wound up, long story short, and this will probably seem, I guess this is the thing, restaurants got to not feel bad about this. We moved the price to $28 and we got less complaints and we sold even more of them. And so there are lots of examples where you need to be willing to push the envelope of what you're able to charge for certain items, and you've got to be really selective about that. And the reason you have to do it is because if you're not willing to make the fundamental changes to your business that are going to make it sustainable, then you're just not going to be there in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. So if you're on a mission to support local food chains, to be the best employer possible, to add value to the community, to do all these different things, that also means you have to be on a mission to be financially viable, because if you're not, then someone's going to come in and not do the things that are important to you. And there's some mental shift that needs to happen, probably to a lot of small business operators, but especially to restaurant operators, that we need to get rid of a lot of the rules of thumbs and think through organically what's right for your particular business with your particular cost structure and your particular market, and make the innovative and eye-opening evaluation of your business that makes you more sustainable. And so there's lots of restaurants that should have been offering their own takeout for a long time, and they knew it, and they got requests, and they kept saying no, and they kept saying no. And in the meantime, the people that would say yes, or the Grubhubs and Uber Eats and Seamlesses and Caviars, came in and did, really well in their sense, but they have their own economic pressures, i.e. they're competing with each other, right? But we kept leaving that along and just saying we don't do takeout because that's not our experience, because our scallop ceviche won't travel well, because this, because that, and all these excuses that just came down to, we don't do takeout because full service restaurants don't do takeout, and we were completely ignoring the demand that was obviously there. We were completely leaving all that consumer surplus on the table for another business to come and take. And now because of survival, you've got great restaurants that are putting together meal kits, experiential offerings, recipes. They're selling alcohol. That's a legislative thing I think would change. I wish would change. And so, I think we gotta. It doesn't. If you don't take in more than you give, then more than you pay out, and that ratio isn't sufficient to pay back the people that gave you their life savings to make it happen. You gotta take a hard look at things, and this is a good opportunity to do it.
I want to. There's so much in there, and it's utterly apparent why you're getting hired to help folks with this, because of how deeply you've thought through everything. I want to go back to the notion of a different menu for Friday, Saturday than the rest of the week. You're really talking about another kind of pretty basic economics concept of surge pricing, right? Like that's effectively, there's a surge in demand, and so let's adjust our pricing model for those periods. It's, people say for traffic, a lane that you have to pay for to pass, like a payable HOV lane, or a payable, turnpike in general, and what that can do to reduce or manage traffic flows and change when people travel. Very similar idea here.
Absolutely. I think surge pricing, you're right that that's one element of it. I think surge pricing has a little bit of a negative connotation because of Uber and whatnot, but we're all completely aware that that it's less expensive to go see Hamilton on Thursday night than Friday night, and it's less expensive to go see it as a matinee. We're all really aware that if we buy the family size box of Cheerios versus like the single serving boxes, it's a different price. And I think you do your consumer a disservice if you don't help them frame their own choice making and experience by giving them the information that they need to do that. And that information is entirely communicated by price. I think in all other areas things are communicated to us via price and in a way that doesn't create resentment. And you see it everywhere. And like I said, that it's going to be cheaper to go see a matinee of Hamilton or a symphony than it will be on Friday or Saturday night. That when you go into a grocery store, you see good, better, best bacon, and that kind of frames what you're going to decide. And almost every other successful industry has gotten really good at pricing. I think some of the low-hanging fruit is sort of like good, better, best pricing, where you understand that, for my family owned and operated a paint store for a long time. And so let's talk about like paintbrushes. So in the paintbrush world, there's Purdy, which is like the premium paintbrush, and it's what contractors use, and it's what people who want to buy the best, have the best, they choose. no-brainer. And then there are what we call chip brushes. And chip brushes are the inexpensive, either someone can't afford it or more often it's a one-off job and they know they're never going to need like an 1.5-inch angle sash again. So that's inexpensive. And then there's the middle of the road. And if you look at sales metrics, and I hate to bring common concepts in everywhere, but they work. It's like the Pareto principle. If you have that good, better, best, and that $7 brush, $11 brush, $16 brush, 80% of people get the middle. And so you actually use the price points of the premium and the discount offering essentially to make it easy for people to get the medium priced offering, because most people, they think, well, I'm not rich and I'm not rich and I'm quote unquote not going to get taken advantage. So I'm not going to spend $17 on this Purdy brush, nor am I poor or want the cheapest thing available. So I'm not going to get this $7 chip brush. So of course I'm going to get the $11 brush. And so framing those experiences in terms of what's called Goldilocks pricing, good, better, best, that's totally reasonable. I mean, if you look at a fine dining experience, and I know Alinea does this and other restaurants do it, and I've helped restaurants do it, if it's a tasting menu or a pre-fee menu or something like that, it's really easy to communicate to a customer that, hey, like this on Friday night at 7:00 is this price. If you're willing to come in on Thursday night at 7:00, it's this lower price. And if you want to come in on Tuesday, it's a really great deal. And, allowing consumers to have that information so that they can support their business, your business, in a way that makes sense for them. I think it's a win for everyone, because there's lots of people that love a restaurant. They'd be glad to go on Tuesday night. They'd be glad to be somewhat disillusioned of only dining happens Friday night at 7:00. And certainly there's a financial incentive for businesses and restaurants to do that sort of thing. But the way what capitalism or what financial management does is it organizes endeavors into whether they provide more value on the way out than they consume in resources on the way in. And so to operate your restaurant profitably, not that you should ever take advantage per se or be disingenuous or dishonest about anything, but if you're on a mission to deliver if you're on a mission to deliver an experience to people that supports small farms, employs people that live in the neighborhood, supports, all sorts of ancillary businesses that are selling to the restaurant. Like, if you don't make it profitable, then it's just going to be the Cheesecake Factory, and all the money is going to get sucked out of your neighborhood into corporate headquarters. And chain restaurants have a place in the ecosystem, and that's absolutely fine. But if we're not careful, there's something to be said for local independent businesses, because when you spend money there, they tend to be a little bit inefficient compared with their corporate peers. And that inefficiency benefits the neighborhood around. It benefits the employees. Like small employers, they pay better, they support more responsible agriculture and livestock and food systems. They work more carefully with their community, they do more charitable giving. Like across the board, a certain amount of inefficiency is a great way to distribute the benefits of people spending money locally. But on the other side of things, if it does become, wall-to-wall Cheesecake Factories, all that money goes up to shareholders. And I'm a believer in publicly traded companies for sure. And I'm an investor, and I love that side of things. But there is a problem. Like if all money spent in an economy gets filtered up into sort of siloed beneficiaries, but it's a society where not everyone can own shares in those beneficiaries, like that creates some serious imbalances. And it is all doable. So a lot of what I do for small bars and restaurants is that I give them the toolkit and I help them think more analytically about what's going on with their businesses and make some of those harder or sharper or more detailed decisions that really give them a chance to be viable, because it's better for the ecosystem. It's better for people. It's better for what they eat. They're better jobs. I can't speak highly enough of the charming inefficiency of small businesses and why it happens to be good for society and the food system at large. And I'm sorry, I can talk about this all the time. I love this stuff.
Yeah, it's obvious, and I love listening to you talk about it. So we're going to keep going. You
do it.
tweeted something about how while you do the bookkeeping for a bunch of these restaurants, you're slowly seeing the wheels of food production and distribution chains slowly grind back into motion, and particularly about pharma updates coming back online. I at a metaphorical meta level, kind of understand what you're saying, but can you talk a little bit about tangibly what you're seeing on the ground start to pick back up?
Yeah, so I'm starting to see vendors and small farms kind of get back to usually what happens. And because I work with lots of different restaurants in lots of different areas, I happen to be part of the email chains where, farms will say, this is what we have for asparagus, for leeks, for ramps, for turnips, for the early season offerings. Normally I would be seeing, 600 or 700 emails a week that have to do with smaller producers or maybe liquor distributors that are talking about what's new in the market right now, what's moving, what the prices are on things, that whole thing. Because I think there are supply chain issues that are going around. I think most people have some familiarity with that, but especially on the restaurant side, that side of the supply chain, when all the restaurants get closed, then it puts a lot of pressure upstream on their producers. And so everything shut down in terms of farms communicating their delivery schedule, what was available, all those sorts of things. And just this last week or so, especially and some of it probably has to do with some of these shutdowns tentatively being lifted. But as restaurants are coming around more to the new reality and doing more pickup and delivery and grocery operations, the vendors behind them are starting to get back to their normal workflow, which is, letting the restaurants know what's available, what's seasonal, what happens to be a great price right now. There are these little sort of, a lot of sales is anecdotal. And so a lot of times in these newsletters, you see, stories about the life cycle of leeks and ramps and things that are seasonal right now. And those sorts of things that are happening and updates behind the scenes, I'm starting to see a lot of those emails get back online, which tells me that a lot more restaurants are opening up, maybe not for full service, but they're realizing that this isn't going to be a 6 or 7 week shutdown. It's going to be a longer thing. It's going to be a longer experience. And I think part of that is also probably that these PPP loans have finally started really moving. And that means that restaurants have money in hand that they can use to open up their operations and take care of their landlords and take care of some of their payables so that they can actually get going again. So it's good to see the food system, which had totally seized up, start to get back into motion.
And you are seeing that money get to those type of places that it's intended for. We don't need to go into Harvard. We don't need to go into these other, large firms. We need it to protect Main Street and protect these SMBs.
Yeah. And that happens to be my political opinion, that these loans should have been targeted towards smaller businesses and had more, there's just lots of things about I think calling it stimulus implies that it's going to bring things forward, and it's more accurately described as backfill, where there's a major capital hole that's just been ripped into the center of all these businesses as their revenue goes from 90% to 85% to effectively zero overnight. And so as the stimulus, for my own personal approach, I was there at 10 o'clock on Thursday, April 2nd, when the Treasury guidelines came out, and they were really different than what we'd been expecting. They changed the underlying form, and then there was sort of the chow line, April 3rd, everything was seized up. And if you read the Treasury guidance, there's some interesting incentives in there. And you could see on Friday the 3rd, you went from 8 a.m., there's no way we're writing these loans today, to 11 a.m., okay, well, if you're an existing customer, hang on, we might be able to do something, to 3 o'clock, like, okay, maybe we can take applications till 5 in the afternoon. Like, here's our online portal to start applying. And that was very clearly the banks figuring out that the incentives were there where they could accept attestations from owners as to the payroll levels, that they would be paid 5% to originate loans up to $350,000, and then a sliding scale after that, 3%, 350 to 2 million, and 1% over 2 million. And they could, on a 7-week period after the loan was issued, they could again get in touch with the borrower and accept an attestation approximating how much of the money would be forgiven. And at that point, once they had that forgiveness attestation from the owner, they can go back to the SBA and get their capital returned. So if you look at that from an incentives point of view, let's talk about a $100,000 loan, even though 350 is the cap. If you can take $100,000 and you're a bank and you can originate it and pocket a 5% coupon, and then 7 weeks later, you can call back that capital from the SBA and reloan it, and again, collect a 5% loan. If you take that, that's an internal rate of return of almost 42% a year before any interest has happened, just boomeranging this money out, getting it forgiven, taking it back, and boomeranging it again. So pretty quickly, the incentives made it so that the banks really mobilized to try and process this stuff. Now, the big banks had a problem because they are not typically SBA lenders. Because normally, the SBA process is very difficult, and it's a small organization, and they've written like 15 years worth of SBA loans, and that number was like 10 days after the program started. So, April 3rd was really tough. I got the majority of my applications in early and middle part of next week. And at this point, 34 of the 41 applications have been approved and funded, thank God. Now, that also sets off an 8-week clock to start the forgiveness portion of that, which can be a little bit tricky if you can't open. But at the same time, what I've been telling all of my clients is that, spend, I shouldn't even say clients, because a lot of these, like I have a lot of clients, but I haven't charged them anything for this because I'm really on a mission to just save small restaurants, and I'll be damned if I'm going to go and try and make money off of someone's existential threat. And then I've brought in a lot of people that I had no association with besides they were referred to me, because I want to save small restaurants in the sense that this is just going to put a lot of places out of business. And it's kind of like baseball, like everyone wins 54 games, everyone loses 54 games. It's that middle 54 that makes a difference. And I'm really, really working hard to try and make that middle 54 be the type of independent, high quality, lots of integrity employee and quality of product offering, and neighborhood driven place. Like those are the people I want to see survive. And so, yeah, I've had really good success with these PPP loans. And now, but my point is to people that have gotten these loans, don't be in a rush to spend money to make it free if it's not additive to your operations. Because, one, there's no reason to do that. That's wasteful. And two, it is going to be a long road. And so if you got these loans hoping to be able to reopen soon, and now your civil authorities and your general marketplace don't allow that, please just don't go out, and please just go out and spend the money just to get it massively forgiven, because it's going to be a long road. And at the end of the day, it's not perfect terms, but 1% for 2 years with 6 months deferred is a capital situation that small restaurants have just never seen and will never see again. And then on the EIDL side, 375 for 30 years. Again, the only people who get 3.75%, you just never see those terms, and your mom still wants your money. So, I hope people use this money wisely with the end in mind to save these jobs on a 10-year scope, and really survive. But it's hard, and it's very different in different parts of the country. I mean, there's no universe where I can picture New York City being open even as soon as the middle of July. I have clients down in Atlanta that frankly, they're not going to open into an unsafe environment. But it's different in different parts of the country. I mean, I think, New York City's tough because it's just the epicenter of a lot of the health concerns. But there's other places that can open up. I mean, I'm down here in southern New Hampshire, and restaurants can be able to open up with outdoor seating and 6-foot separation requirements, like on May 18th. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I guess I want all business owners and maybe all people to use this time to think about the things in their business that weren't working and the assumptions that might need to be questioned or at least kicked around on a forward-looking basis, and to really try and think through what it looks like to evolve their businesses and their industry so that we can go the distance here. It's like that old Abe Lincoln quote. It's like, given 6 hours to chop down the tree, you should use the first 4 hours to sharpen the axe. So I hope everyone across the country is sharpening the axe and planning to deploy this capital responsibly, because it's not going to be a short thing.
So I so align with that desire to support the local restaurants, and that's kind of been like our regular mission on the weekends, is figuring which of our restaurants we want to make sure that to get out to and give some of our business to. That being said, the accelerant of these kind of secular trends that were already playing out, actually, frankly, the acknowledgement of surge pricing with Uber could bring us very naturally to Travis Kalanick, who sold all his Uber stock, is investing in the new company Cloud Kitchens. For folks that aren't familiar, this is a basic premise that instead of having a dine-in area, you build an industrial kitchen in a piece of real estate that is not necessarily located on a main thoroughfare, that hopefully lowers your rent, lowers your square footage cost, and allows you to optimize and design a space for a food delivery only experience. And your marketing is tailored towards that. Your production is tailored towards that. Very, forward thinking and informed by his experience seeing the growth of Uber Eats within the larger Uber ecosystem. So I'm curious to put to you, maybe if you just have like a general take on the viability of that model, or what your general perspective is. I know that definitely wouldn't fall in the kind of like small restaurant, farm raised, like super high area that you are deeply invested in. But what's kind of your perspective as someone in the restaurant space?
I think as someone in the restaurant space, I think it solves a lot of operational pressures. The rent is a big one. The cost to build those facilities, like not in the middle of urban centers, is good. I think there's a big market for it. I think that restaurants need, here's where I would push back on the success of it somewhat. That at the end of the day, what restaurants sell is not food and not alcohol and not soda and not beer, but they sell a sense of community and closeness and kindness and being treated well. And I think a lot of customers aren't really as aware of that. But then again, it's often people don't understand what they're really spending money on, right? And I used to, in training bartenders and servers and all sorts of stuff like that, I would point out, and also in justifying sort of some of the price discussions that are harder for owners to come around to, because that's always been the way it is. But I don't know why. There is a sad reality as to why restaurants are so popular, and why bars are so popular. And, people come in, what people are going to restaurants for is, I think, to be treated kindly and to have a special experience. And so it isn't, if it were only about getting fed, then the grocery store and lots of cheaper alternatives could do that. If it was only about having a few drinks, then liquor stores, same observation. There's something special about being treated well by someone who knows how to deliver a feeling of warmth and sincerity and genuine kindness. And I think that's what has made restaurants, especially neighborhood restaurants, really sought after in the economy. And so I think that given that, I think that's what drives a lot of people to restaurants, and they don't necessarily all know it. And even worse, a lot of the owners don't know it, but it's that experience and that sense of being deeply, deeply cared for while you're in someone else's space, or whatever you want to call it. And I think this is true of people's homes as well. But, I think that's actually what drives the broad appeal of people going to restaurants. And so I think I can simultaneously believe that restaurants need to embrace doing pickup and takeout and delivery to make the economics of their model make more sense. However, if a restaurant doesn't have a physical space in order to generate that loyalty and that feeling, I'm not sure that they can justify the same price point and have the same economics per se. So I'd have to think about it more, and I'd have to see how it works. I mean, I think a lot of times people support restaurants and they become like diehard adherents because they've been there, and they've been there when someone, noticed that they weren't having a good night, or went the extra mile because they overheard it was their anniversary, or there was some sort of family issue going on. It's those little moments of kindness and taking the extra care, going the extra mile, that tend to bind a customer to an establishment. And I'm not sure a ghost kitchen has the capacity to necessarily create that underlying experience. That being said, it's a free market, and so we'll see. But I guess I feel like over time, once something gets commoditized, then it has to live with the fact that it's in a commodity market. And so, like, for instance, I'm not sure if Momofuku's, like, if you go to Momofuku and have a great experience, then you're more likely to order there. Can Momofuku exist if that institution isn't there to give those great experiences on the front edge? I'm not sure. And if over time, if that's not there, can sort of a brand be built in the same way that it can be built in a physical restaurant? I don't know, but the economics make a lot of sense. And it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of those ghost kitchens start to partner with places that have loyal followings and brick and mortar locations, and start executing the food with the same level of care that those brick and mortar places do. But I do think the starting point of success for bars and restaurants is actually that kindness and that hospitality and that warmth that people get out of it. And also they want, like, in a more and more sort of not outsourced, but remote society, people, I mean, they definitely crave, they spend all the day in their phones and their cubicles and on their screens. I think they crave, like, being close to each other. But that would drive us full circle to whether that can be done in the same manner after something like this. So I'm not sure. I mean, the economics are there, but I think it's hard. Price cuts both ways. Like the price of, like, a great burger from a restaurant that you actually went to and enjoyed there, I'm not sure if that exists in a vacuum without the front-facing hospitality that actually made it a terrific experience. So we'll see.
Yeah, we will. Keith, I appreciate you giving me so much of your time and so much of your wisdom about the space here. If people want to connect with you in the digital world, learn more about Alchemy Financial, anything else that you're up to, are there digital coordinates that we can provide for them to do so?
Yeah, so I think my hands down, my favorite platform has become Twitter. At We Live to Serve. Like, We Live to Serve was my hospitality mantra for a long time. Trump supporters beware. And you can email me at alchemyboston@gmail.com. Alchemy is in to transmute lead into gold, and Boston is in home of the Red Sox, best baseball team out there. And yeah, I'm always glad to talk shop with small business owners. I suppose I'm lucky in that I'm not really looking to aggressively grow. Unfortunately, I'm not an app. I can't really be multiplied, but I'm deeply committed to seeing small bars and restaurants succeed and go forward, and sort of change their business models so that they can have better lives and continue to provide that experience to a long, hopefully happy forward tail of customers and vendors and employees. So yeah, feel free to reach out, and I'd love to help wherever I can.
Beautiful. We're going to make sure all those links are available for people in the show notes for this episode or at goingdeeperthere.com, like for every episode of the show. But before I let you go, Keith, I want to wrap things up with giving you the mic one final time to issue an actionable personal challenge for the audience.
I just be mindful of everything. Be mindful of how you make decisions. Be mindful about how you treat each other and your family. Be mindful about how you spend your money. Certainly be mindful of the choices you're making when you choose a small local business versus the alternative. And I don't know, I think we always got to be learning and questioning our assumptions and really focusing on what's important. And I hope people will think that through when it comes to time to make decisions in politics and with how they spend their money and how they treat each other and how we decide to move forward as a very modern and quickly evolving organism.
I love it. I at least I say this to myself a lot, and I say it to other people, is, a lot of people think their kind of vote is constrained to election or election day or sometime in November. And the reality is you're voting every single day with your dollars. You're voting every single day with your feet, where you take yourself, where you pay your attention. And so I think that, bringing mindfulness to all of those decisions is incredibly important and can have a really large impact.
Yeah, I also think you're voting every time you have a positive or negative thought about yourself and your choices. And I think we kind of start with vote by being good to yourself and vote by, saying nice things about yourself, and be at least as nice to yourself and your children as you would expect other people to be. So
beautiful note to wrap up on. Keith, thank you so much for coming on the show.
We live to serve. Thanks so much for having me.
We just went deep with Keith Harmon. Hope everyone out there has a fantastic day.
Thank you so much for watching to the end of the interview. If you found it valuable, make sure you give us a thumbs up, hit subscribe, and check out our large back catalog of past interviews.